The Squash Courtship of Freddy's Father is the 5th episode of the 2nd season of Frasier. This is directed by Jude Weng, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I enjoyed it. It's not the funniest episode, but it is suspenseful, and I genuinely thought it was going in one direction. I was genuinely prepared to say I did not approve of this decision. I did not like it. And then, out of nowhere, it just completely changed. And if anybody wants to say that actually they saw it coming and it was really obvious, fair enough. But I didn't, and I will, of course, talk about what happens as we get there chronologically. So it starts off with Alan, Olivia, David, and Freddy gathered in Frasier's apartment to discuss his memoir. They're all supposed to have read it, but Olivia didn't because she thought the meeting was next week. Alan gives some great thoughts to Olivia, just as an example of the kind of thing she could get away with saying. She copies it word for word, and Alan obviously is not very happy about this. Niles had sent some notes with David, which I rather loved, and the notes, I could hear Niles saying them, which was really, really lovely. Eve then comes over and said that it was a bit dense. And the only book she's been reading is, of course, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which she's been reading to John. I assume she's been reading it to John. And she tries to tell Frasier that the book reminded her of a very hungry insect. And Frasier thinks she's talking about Kafka's Metamorphosis. And Frasier's happy with that. So no problems at all. The only person who isn't happy, well, Alan's also not happy with Olivia, but Freddy is not happy that Frasier described him as an alien. And Frasier seems to think this was done affectionately, but it also highlights the fact that they don't have anything in common. So they agree to go and play squash together. But first, Frasier is going to the opera and is meeting Bebe Glazer. And we then cut to the opera, and it's a very small set design. We just have a couple of chairs, and Bebe, of course, is fantastic as always. We then meet her daughter, played by Rachel Bloom. And Frasier says, I didn't know you had a daughter. And she says, I also had a turtle, but you're the one with the memoir. A little bit random, but very Bebe, and I rather liked it. And we meet Phoebe, and we'll come back to Phoebe in a little bit. But my first impressions of the character, she seemed quite likeable, but more thoughts on her in a moment. We're then in Mahoney's. After squash, seems to have gone well. Freddy said he had a great day. Whether or not he did in that moment, who knows? But it was a lovely thing for him to say. He goes off to the side. Frasier tells the others that he just had no chemistry with Freddy. And he even says, it was nothing like when I used to play with Niles. Which is not fair. It's not fair to expect to have the same relationship with your son as you do with your brother. Granted, I feel like you should have in my opinion, a stronger relationship with your son, unless you're very, very close to your brother. Would we say Frasier and Niles were close? I say they have periods of being close. But I don't think it's necessarily fair for Frasier to be assessing the situation as if he were playing with Niles. At the mention of Niles, David pops up with more notes from Niles. And then Frasier does something that I think is unforgivable. He is supposed to have plans with Freddy, but he blows them off to go and be with Phoebe, because Phoebe seems to have a lot in common with Frasier. And at that meeting, we learn that she was a 1995 baby. And I think the audience's reaction at that point was very telling. And I had to Google as well, because that is when, this is a spoiler for something that happens in the main series, or the original series, Bebe, and I've just realised Phoebe and Bebe rhyme. I like that a lot. Bebe and Frasier spent the night together. But in my memory, I couldn't remember that it was 1995. And I think it's fair to say that the audience, only some people in the audience connected the dots when Frasier pointed out it was 1995. So I think they maybe expected a stronger reaction there. But once I Googled it and realised, yes, it was 1995, I began to think, Is she his daughter? Is this what they're doing with this? I really hope not. And again, more on that in a moment. We're then in the office with Alan and Olivia. And they're saying how they're worried about Frasier and how Frasier is trying to have a different relationship with Freddy to what he has. And Alan points out It's not about shared interests and hobbies. It's about showing up for your child. And obviously, Alan wants a stronger relationship with his daughter, and here's Frasier with his son every single day and is trying to make it something it isn't, and isn't just appreciating the relationship he has with him. And Frasier comes in saying, I have a daughter. And Olivia steals Alan's line again. And then Frasier meets with Phoebe, and he basically tells her, I am your father. And then he says, I think I am. And they have a bit of a conversation. And I was still thinking, this is it. This is the direction in which they're going. Frasier has a long lost daughter. I don't want this. This is ridiculous. And then Frasier, being one step ahead of me, realised something that I didn't. Phoebe says that she lives in Bushwick. Frasier points out that there are new TV studios in Bushwick, and for him the penny has dropped. Phoebe is not his daughter. It turns out she's actually Bebe's assistant, and she is obviously trying to get him to sign for another TV deal. And he doesn't want to do this. And I hope they don't do that with the show. I think if he did like a one-off thing, that would be fine. But I don't want him to become Frasier Crane, the TV star again. Having said that, if they do decide to do that, I'll go in with it an open mind. But I really hope they don't. And it turns out that Phoebe read his memoir, loved his memoir. That's how she knew all about him. And I thought that was actually really sweet. Then Freddy arrives, annoyed because he found out that Frasier wasn't comforting Phoebe, who'd just allegedly hurt her ankle, and Frasier tells him, you're not some alien, you're my special boy. Freddy doesn't care. He orders Frasier to the car like an angry parent, which was really good fun. They leave, and I really wish that's where we'd left it with Bebe and Phoebe. But then they start to talk to each other about how they're reeling Frasier in still, and they're still on this plan to get the TV deal. And I didn't like that. It made me feel a lot of mixed emotions about Phoebe because her speech about the memoir was so convincing and I really liked that and I believed it. So I don't know. I don't love that final moment between Bebe and Phoebe. Maybe it's realistic, but I don't love it. And then we end with Frasier and Freddy at the piano, and then David's there, and it was a nice enough way to end things. It's not my favourite episode. Largely because I don't think it's the funniest, but it doesn't need to be laugh out loud funny for me to enjoy it. I thought it was still very suspenseful, very well done. So glad that Phoebe isn't Frasier's daughter. I don't think that would have been the right direction to take, but it was suspenseful nonetheless, and ultimately, while it's not my favourite episode, the squash courtship of Freddy's father was still pretty decent, and I wouldn't skip it if I was binge watching this season. I haven't done that with the first season yet. I might go back to the first season and watch it back to back. Maybe, we'll see. But for now, this is not a bad episode.